Hello, this is Peter Ferretto, who teaches at the Chinese University of Hong Kong School of Architecture. I will make a short introduction under the theme of what is resilience, and this is a course that I taught in conjunction with the global studios of the Seoul Biennale of Architecture of 2021. The studio was called Conditions, the Forgotten Villages of Hong Kong. What the studio did, it consisted of 14 students looking at 5 village conditions in Hong Kong. The area is the New Territories, and what this area is famous for is some very well preserved Chinese villages. Paradoxically, the best preserved villages, Chinese villages, are in this area, because a lot of the villages in mainland China were affected by the Cultural Revolution. So students working in groups identified 5 villages that were either abandoned, in the process of disappearing, or suffering from people leaving. Here you see some pictures of what the village conditions are. They're very different. They're very different settlements. One particular one was a Hakka village on a remote island that was famous for its salt mines and the settlement of the first Catholic missionaries in Hong Kong. Other ones are close to urban settings, and many are completely abandoned. Students then proceeded into working in groups. They looked and did a site survey, the mapping, which included the rituals, the history, and the materials, and they tried to get a deeper understanding of the site. And what was interesting, that many students kind of found that the traditions are kept in the rituals. Somehow many of the villages have been destroyed, but what remains are the festivals and this kind of notion, ethnographic notion of keeping alive some of the traditional festivities that happen every year, or that happen in some cases every 10 years. And then again, working in groups in the first semester, the students put together a small community building with the idea to activate the village or part of the village. Again, here they made reference to what we call the DNA of the village. So in many cases, in the bottom here, you can see a temporary structure which are built during the festivities, or in the case of the top, some students created an underground spiritual space connected to the island's history of religion and spirituality, made in a traditional Hakka material. Other students were looking at the notion of farming and how farming could be sort of kept alive, and using existing abandoned houses and remodeling them into community kitchens. Here you can see at the top, using traditional materials. This all culminated in the midterm, where we had a big review. And here you can see some of the prototypes. One of the fundamental parts of the studio is to make models at different scales, so sort of give a real tangible and real feeling of what the potential spaces are, and also sort of explore the tectonic elements. Here you can see the reviewers. We had the head of the school and the ex-head of the school come and visit, and we were very fortunate that in this sort of pandemic period we were able still to have face-to-face reviews. From that point, then the students started to work individually and try to extract the DNA from the first part, and then see how this could then culminate into a building, a public building, a civic building that could engage people either through tourism or through local people to create new economies. In this case, it's a student who was looking at reactivating an old kiln, and through that trying to get artisans and the trade of making tiles and bricks back to the village. Here you can see how she's working on the edge of the village on a very sort of steep morphology, and how the section unfolds and how the program follows both the contours, but also importantly the river, which is a source that would feed then the kiln for cooling and also for environmental reasons. Another student was looking at the notion of spirituality on an island, and she developed a religious center, like a missionary, where priests could come and contemplate, and the village has a strong history of this. And here you see she starts working with the land, a very important factor in Hakka culture, the respect and working with the land. And here you see some of the final solutions, which is very much a building built in earth with some a roofscape that sort of is this threshold between the land and the sea on the other edge. Many students were interested in reactivating trades that already existed in these villages. This is a student who was looking at the salt pans and how the crystallization of seawater could then produce the product. And in the olden days, salt was a very valuable material because it preserved food. And so the student looked at creating a series of terraces, a building with a series of terraces where the crystallization could happen on the facade, so in order sort of to make the building more dynamic. Here you see a final review. This is the thesis project, and you can see how the project evolves from the beginning, an analysis of the typologies of buildings. This particular student was looking at the notion of lightweight steel material that pervades in this area, and how this could work with, rather than work against the historical buildings, work close and sort of in harmony with the existing buildings. You can see that she very carefully studies the different typologies of buildings. The black ones are existing and belong to the fabric. The white buildings in the model are the temporary ones, and sort of she was collaging these two typologies together in her project, which is the yellow one. Very much based on understanding of the roof. All the projects are very in a way low key. They're no higher than 3 stories, and very much vernacular in their language, but modern in terms of how they work and also the program. Another student was looking at the notion of death and how the villagers celebrate this, and in a certain way it's a public event where a lot of people that have left the village would come back to visit. So she was looking at other ways that the temple and the ceremonial hall could be reinvented or analyzed. This student in particular was interested in the abandoned village and how abandoned buildings next to the forest or within the forest and the notion of ruin could be used as a therapeutical center. And here you can see how she eventually evolved. Again, the importance of very simple buildings with very simple roofs, but creating sort of ephemeral and interesting spaces. Again, always looking at the notion of space, and then the notion of space trying to make the architecture. Rather than starting with a plan, we start with more what I call an atmosphere, and then the atmosphere leads to then a project. Here you can see the resolution, and finally how the building sits within the landscape. A more abstract center, this student was looking at the notion of language and how the Hakka language, which is a language that is more or less phonetic, it's not written, is passed on, and how it's slowly disappearing, and how this center, this school, could keep that language alive. So it's a building that sort of acts like a bridge, and the bridge connects the old part, the mountain, and the new part. This student was looking at a village that is enclosed, that is sort of for reasons in the past, so that people didn't come and ransack or steal from the village. And now the wall, rather than being a deterrent, the wall becomes something that can connect. And the village inside is 20 or 80% abandoned, so the student was looking at reusing that and making it into an experience, especially around the notion of rice and rice wine and the fermentation of rice. So this is basically a sample of the projects, and I hope you enjoy it. There's a website called Condition Villages Hong Kong. You're welcome to see it, and I hope you enjoy the show. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.